Welcome to the Cybersecurity Vault. I'm your host, Matthew Rosenquist, cybersecurity strategist and CISO at Eclipz. Today, we're going to talk about the evolution of the CISO and what the future holds. And I'm going to be talking with David Hahn. David is the CISO of CDK Global, a leader in the software and technology for the automotive industry, and previously led security for Silicon Valley Bank, Wells Fargo, Intuit, Hearst Media Group, and is a member of a number of different advisory boards. So he brings deep experience with fraud, identity, security operations, and product assurance from his 16 years of being in this industry. Now, today's podcast is created in part by Eclipz, securing data in transit through any cloud, network, and device. Welcome, David, and thank you for coming and talking with us.
Great. No, thank you, Matthew, and thanks for having me. Great to talk to you.
Well, it's going to be a great discussion here, but before we dive into the shifting challenges of the CISOs, I wanted to ask you, what has kept you in this industry? It's not an easy industry to be in,
Right.
and you've been in it for 16 years. What is it deep down that
Right.
keeps you in this game?
So, I always call myself the accidental CISO because it wasn't like I was planning to do this when I was in college or, kind of growing up. Hey, that's what I want to be. Because as you know, Matthew, there was no such thing, when we were in college.
Right, it didn't exist.
Exactly. So it was just this nebulous thing called, security, a bunch of geeky guys who work on firewalls and stuff like that. That was about the extent of security. So, I think it started back when I was at Wells Fargo, and certainly, huge bank, lots of things to worry about in terms of security and concerns. And, it's always, kind of front and center. So I had security functions that were part of my many teams that I had at Wells Fargo. But then more and more, it's like starting about 2000, FFIC had come up with what they called their basically, framework for cybersecurity. And it was the first time that it really started to become like a serious thing. Clearly, there was a lot of problems, related to fraud, certainly the number of hacks, even at that point, early stages of DDoS attacks that were going on. And so those types of disruption was definitely impeding Wells Fargo's kind of march toward online banking. Back then, they still called it that. Like online banking was like a whole separate thing. And,
We take it for granted now. We expect it.
exactly. Anyway, so as they were doing that, then they're kind of like, all right, we don't know what this thing is, but FFI says that we have to have some kind of a CISO, head of security. So like, David, we want you to be there. So I'm like, oh, wow. So I was honored. I was like, great. And then I started to realize as I read through all of that, it's like they need somebody who's accountable in case something goes wrong. Your head's the one that's going to be chopped.
You're the scapegoat. Yes.
Well, what did I get myself into? But I think what it showed was that was exactly what is needed. You need accountable people. You need people who are going to take responsibility, people who are going to call things out. You have to be the squeaky wheel to be able to say, hey, this is not working. We got to get to it versus everybody just kind of assuming somebody else will take care of it. So I think, that was provided me in terms of a lot of foresight to say, okay, yeah, this is a type of thing. So I guess I'm good at being a squeaky wheel or kind of making clear. But what I found was that it almost became a natural. I certainly didn't study it. It wasn't like, I was born to do this. So as I learned my way through that time, and again, it was just great experience just being attacked constantly, right? So there's nothing like, feet to the fire in terms of learning. And then only then that I started to, read about it and learn about it. I kind of, almost kind of like reverse engineer in terms of trying to learn. I got my CISSP and all the different things that you kind of should do kind of from the beginning on. I went back and this really resonated with me. And then I think, this is going to be part of today's discussion is really that it wasn't just a technical issue, right? It really was about risk management and understanding kind of what the business outcomes, need to be. And really things like fraud is all about that. Things like DDoS and even ransomware, really gets into the disruption of the business. And you get to a lot of meaty, business type of discussion. Do we pay the ransom? How do we handle our, business resumption? And what if our site is down? Oh my gosh, right? So these are all business issues. These are things, and that's kind of my background. That's exactly the one thing that I did study and try to learn to that. So really, I think bringing those things together really hit home for me. And so ever since then, I'm kind of still doing it. And guess what? They keep hiring me. So I don't know. We must still have issues here that we need people like us or you and I, right?
Well, I can tell you've got a passion for it. I mean, and it's really tough for people who don't have a passion to
Yeah.
continue accepting those roles,
Right.
and trying to achieve that next higher level. So, I mean, that's fantastic. Being able to get up in the morning and smile and being excited. I think it's a requirement really
Right.
to be a good CISO and have longevity and not get burned out. So you had mentioned some great things, right? Back in the old DDoS days, where that's really was the primary attack that we had to worry about, and networking issues and going online and all those things. So, you know, in your years and experience, right? Have you seen, both in your responsibility and with others, how has the CISO role evolved? From a scope or a depth or even a visibility in the organization. What have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are things that a security group department need to do that is solely what a security group. You talk about, making sure that you have a team that has incident response, right? Basically dealing with things that kind of like the firemen. We're the firemen, right? So we always like jump into different things. So it's a specialized thing. That's something the security team will do. At the same time, they cannot be successful unless they basically make sure that all the other business groups, all the other technology teams, all the other product teams, engineering teams also not only understand but adopt security principles and practices in place. Because again, you could only have so many firemen, they're just not going to sustain it. You can't scale it. So you got to try to work on preventing things. You got to build security into your products, into your services from the beginning. That will give you your best chance to ensure that you don't have security incidents, you don't have breaches. So how do you do that? You got to spend a lot of time talking to people. You got to spend a lot of time showing people how to do it. You have to be able to show developers, hey, there are development practices that don't actually take more time. It actually reduces time. In fact, it'll help you get to market faster. There's automation that we could do with DevOps teams when they talk about, no, I don't want to deal with any security because it's going to slow us down. So you really got to show them how you can build automation into what they're doing, scripts or different tools that they have. So that really ties into the language and the kind of the process of how they work. You got to work with product teams to say, hey, the authentication that you build that makes it really easy for customers also makes it really easy for bad guys. Okay, so you got to balance that together to say, well, how do you do it? But then, so we certainly don't want to make it so difficult for your customers that they just give up and like say, hey, this is crazy. I'm not going to use this product or this service. So how do you find that right balance? What are the best ways? The best thing that I try to, if security is kind of happening behind the scenes and the user doesn't even realize it, then you've achieved your goal. But in order to do that, you got to immerse yourself. You can't hope that good security comes out of it. You got to work your way. So that's design, that's architecture, that's basically planning all the way through. And then even the IT teams who are used to putting up firewalls and routers and all, and they think that's all security. That's not enough. Matthew, as you know, right, the attacks are no longer on breaking firewalls. They go around it, they go through it, right, because of account takeovers, taking advantage of access controls or improper access controls or elevated privileges. So these are the type of things where the typical traditional type of security related to like network and hardware just doesn't work anymore because, again, your boundaries are no longer contained. It's much more open, access through the internet. There's so many different places that you can be. So yeah, there's a lot that's involved there. And so what I've learned is you gotta do that. You gotta be this evangelist. So I'm like this ambassador. Like think about it like oh my gosh, you think of the UN and how many countries you have to go visit and talk to and really help them. And you really have to do that to really change the mindset, change the thinking. But at the same time, you have to also make it that's useful to them so they can say, okay, this is how I can do it. Security is not this mystery thing. This is how I incorporate it and add it into what it is that we do.
So you've covered so much there. Let's unpack a couple of things. You had mentioned about not only covering infrastructure but also products and really being that evangelist across the organization because it's all over the place that you have to be able to touch and influence. Now, we know introducing security brings costs. It brings additional friction to either end users or the organizations that have to support it or institute it. Are you seeing those internal groups, whether it be the product group or the IT group or whatnot, do you see them over time, right? If you compare today versus 10 years ago, do you see them more open to those discussions, or are they still resistant and pushing back? No, we'll do security later. That's not important. Or do you see them, going, okay, I'm willing to listen at least, but don't crush my costs. Don't, make it so unusable that my customers are going to run away, on fire. What's the mentality of those partners internally that you're dealing with now?
Yeah, so I would say I think we've kind of certainly reached the point that nobody's immune to it and nobody can plead ignorance. Oh, I've never heard of that, right? They see the headlines, they see the news, it's all over the place. From board members to senior executives, you can read the Wall Street. I mean, it's all over the place. Breaches, attacks, ransomware. I mean, these are words that, everybody knows and it's out there. So the really issue becomes how does that impact us, right? It's almost to the point that it's oversaturated with so much. Every single day, somebody is dealing with a breach, somebody's dealing with a hack, and so that makes the news. So everybody kind of sees that kind of the sensation of the headlines. But then they are trying to figure out, well, how does the SolarWinds issue impact us? Am I a customer? Am I a user? How do we do that? And so you still have to go through kind of that explanation, but it's less of kind of like, what is this? But more of like, is this really impacting us, or which one is impact? Which one should we worry about? So it's this whole notion of kind of prioritization, of risk assessments. What are the things that we have to worry about the most? So at least they will, have that discussion with you. What they are hoping for versus what they need to do is they think that the security department will kind of take care of everything. Like, okay, you guys will. And I keep saying, no, there's only so much we can do. I need everybody, to kind of all hands on deck has to do it. So it's still my job to explain to them what they can do within their, if they're a developer, if they're IT person, if even auditors, right, in terms of helping them in terms of what they should focus in on and what to look at. So I think we have now passed the point of kind of recognition. Now we got to get, how do you do that, or which things are priority? Because I've got all this revenue and customer impacting issues and security. Like, where does that fit in? Are you telling me I got to stop doing revenue? No. I'm not saying stop doing that. You got to do it together, and so we got to combine that. So yeah, I think that's the point that we're at. We're at it. And now we're dealing with tough business issues, which is priorities, right? Which is how do you incorporate it together? So, I always try to talk about, hey, I got to talk to the architect type people to say, hey, let's design this from the beginning. And if we do, it's much, much easier if you think about it ahead versus always try to put Band-Aids on everything. That's not a good approach either. So yeah, so I really do believe that we've changed the discussion. I'm not sure if it's like resolved, but I think we're in a better position that we begin to start having the design discussions and talk through that. But I still think we're a long ways away where it's a DNA thing and it's built into everything. That still takes time, and but we're on our way there.
Well, I think there's a lot of CISOs out there that are still in just that firefight mode, just in that IT mode, and they're not looking yet to evolve to what you're talking about of being that trusted advisor to help the organizations and evangelize, right, some of this more predictive and preventative types of controls. They're only in the detection response, firefight mode. How do you think, or what recommendations would you give to those CISOs in finding themselves in that position, that they haven't established that trusted advisory role yet, and maybe they don't have the visibility? What can they do to expand, to be able to move into that more prediction and prevention space across the organization?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things you could, and definitely use frameworks that are out there. Don't try to just make it up because then it's kind of like, well, David, did you just pull that out of your pants? Or like, well, what the heck is that? And so, I use in this frameworks and CIS frameworks, and you just talked about, right? Identify, protect, detect. So if you kind of line those up, and just simple thing as looking at budgets over the last 2 or 3 years, right? You kind of look at investment spends that have been made. If the majority of your investment spend is on respond, and then it's like, okay, you're never going to be able to keep up with it. So the question is, can you move that up and focus more on identify, focus more on protect, even detection, right? Going through it. So that's one way that I've been using to explain. So for example, when I've started positions, I go through and say, okay, looks like the previous people spent a lot of money on identifying. So that's good because now we have a good idea. We know what the universe is, we know where our assets are, we know what it is that we have to deal with. We've been able to uncover where the gaps are, where the problems are, but we haven't solved them, right? So now we got to shift over to the protect side or to the detect side. And so we go through that. So that gives, especially senior, oh, okay, there's a strategy that we're talking about versus just money just goes to the security team and they don't know where it's going, right? And then what I can then do is justify the investment spends that are being made to each of the categories and then almost predictably what next year's budget should be and why am I moving my way. So I'm showing that I'm moving from the identified part, and a lot of the identified is not just with me, it's with the IT teams, right? Like things like CMDB and IT management,
Right.
asset management. There are a lot of things that aren't really in my budget, but then we're saying from a company level, those are the strategic investments that have been made. So we're tied together with IT in terms of their strategy and my strategy. So I need that. So I need to depend on that. As they've done that, now we're going to focus on the protect. So I'm going to try to prevent. I'm going to try to put in agents on devices. I'm going to try to get to a zero trust model. I'm going to try to get to different things. So I show where I'm spending the money there, and then the results need to show it. So definitely you want to be able to tie together with, I don't want to call it metrics. I think it's more of telling a story. Right? So don't get caught up in the numbers, but more of as we've been spending our money in these things, we've been able to reduce the number of incidents as we get through there. At the same time, I don't want to make it like it's not that simple, right? Because the attack surface continuously evolves.
It constantly changes and grows.
It's not like the bad guys follow the model and
Right.
say, okay, all right,
We'll
got
stop
it.
and let you catch up. No,
Yes.
they don't like to do that.
Yeah, no. So they're just going to keep going. They're just going to evolve, right? Now that if your on-prem is well protected, they're going to go after your cloud. So it doesn't matter. They're indiscriminate. Wherever it is that there's an opportunity, they're going to take advantage of it. And so what I keep saying is that's assuming you have a stack. But we as a business are changing. Let's say you have a big cloud initiative and an automation and transformation. So let's say you're 90% on-prem, and then by, I don't know, 3 years, you want to get to 90% on cloud. Great, going to cloud. Guess what? I have to totally change the security framework to be able to, but I still have on-prem and. So it's always an and that we're doing because you can never seem to get rid of some of your legacy environment. And so you have to be able to show how you're doing it. So then I provide a sense of where are we doing with on-prem versus what are we doing with cloud, right? So you have to be able to explain where the problems are. And so by doing that, I think it gives, again, a story that is related to business outcomes. They understand where investment spends are being made. They understand that they're seeing results out of that. So you really have to elevate that story. Otherwise, you'll just become a firefighter. And guess what? There is no endage of fires. And you don't want firemen, being sent to a forest fire like, oh, there's no, just keep doing it, keep doing it. No, that's not a good outcome.
So, everything you're talking about is it's scope creep, right? And it's the CISO role over time. It doesn't shrink. It's always growing. You had mentioned on-prem and now cloud and by the way, it's no longer just managing the ACLs on the firewall. You've got all the other infrastructure pieces on endpoint and whatnot. And by the way, DevOps for all the products and services that now that you have. It's growing and growing and growing. And you also mentioned legacy systems rarely get ripped out. So how do CISOs, right, keep their head in the game to be able to manage that scope creep? Because if you're not ahead of it, you're behind it. And that just means more fires. And you don't get more firemen and firewomen, right? How does a CISO manage that scope creep?
Well, Matthew, I have a lot of wine that I've accumulated.
Wine, whiskey, cigars. Okay, now I know where you're going with. All right. I'm not sure if we could recommend that, though.
Okay. It doesn't solve it, but it does help you kind of cope with it a little bit.
It softens it. Okay, yes.
Yeah. So this is where I always say, your program, sometimes CISOs like to call themselves a program to kind of give themselves a kind of a definition of time. I've got a 3-year program, 2-year program, whatever, they go to that. Well, guess what? Your program continues to grow, right? And evolve. Maybe it's great. So there's a set of initiatives that you want to get done, but you have to always assume and know that you have to build your program to keep evolving on that. Meaning, so it's a continuous program. It never ends. It's one of those, it's a journey, not a destination. Absolutely. And so that's what I always, try to explain to the board, to senior management. Okay, here's a set definition of what we're going to go after, set strategy for the next 18 months. We're going to build an IAM program. We're going to build a cloud program as you go to there. But that's not it. That's not the end. Okay, that's just the first part, right? So we got to build foundation. We got to get to the next thing. And there's no such thing as we're going to plateau and then we're just going to kick back and enjoy, right? It's this constant buildup that you have to go through. Why? Because the business is shifting and changing. It's not because of me, and yes, the bad guys that keep shifting, but the bad guys are shifting because the business keeps taking advantage of new technology, new capabilities, remember 10 years ago when cloud was just being talked about? It was just kind of like, oh, is that something we're going to do? Well, guess what? That's now ubiquitous. Mobile, remember when mobile was like, oh, that's going to be a cool thing. Guess what? Business are moving toward these great ideas, these things that really help the business to grow. And so are the attack surface, and so are the risks that goes associated with it. So really, it's to say, hey, security is part of the business strategy. Oh, yeah, that's a key thing. Meaning, if we're going to go into a new market, we're going to go into, and I don't mean just physical, I mean in terms of new ways of doing it, where we're going to acquire companies that are in this industry. Those are all new risks that come about, or additional risks that go through. So you have to tell that story with it to say that security is always going to be there. It's almost like the yin yang. It's the complementary of every kind of business initiative. There's going to be a set of new or bigger security risks that come with it. And so guess what? I'm not saying avoid it. I'm saying give me a chance to work together with you to kind of prepare for it, right? To build it into it. So let's kind of design it. Let's make sure that we know what we're getting ourselves into. I don't want to slow things down. At the same time, we should not just go breakneck speed where we're just blinded, right? So work through it. So anyway, so I think that's part of the discussion you got to be able to have. And so by doing it, I feel like, hey, at least I'm moving forward. But I do know that sometimes, there is not an end. Long as I'm not on a treadmill, what I'm seeing, I've done that over and over again. I keep doing the same thing. Then I think you feel like you're challenged because, again, I'm moving with the business. So therefore, the business challenges are what keeps you enticed to say, hey, we're going in the right direction as a company.
So in moving with the business, how important is it for the CISO to be in lockstep with IT as they're vetting new technologies or developing new things that they're going to put in the environment, or with the product group as they're coming up with the next rev, the next features, the next, whiz bang capability, the next product? How important is the CISO to be involved in those early discussions?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I think part of it is when we say the CISO needs to be, it kind of makes it sound like one person, right? It makes it sound like, David needs to be here, to here, here. You just can't be, right? So this is where I get to this. We need a surrogate David or a surrogate CISO to be available. So I have to make sure, kind of making sure we lead it, that we have a person or group of people there who are designated to be the security person, who thinks that way, have that kind of critical thinking to get through that. So my job is always to, how do I plant the seeds of the type of people who are doing it? They may not be part of my department, right? But again, they're part of it. So architects are great because they understand security. It's not like, they don't know what it is, but their focus may be different. So this is where kind of how to evangelize those groups. How do you get certain developers, certain engineers in each of the teams to get through that? Because you just cannot scale every single place. So that's where I think it has to be, right? We have to be able to get kind of security-minded thinking all over the place. There's no shortage, because there's no way you can ask or expect the CISO to be every single place. So really, I don't think of that as my job. My job is to propagate, evangelize, whatever the words are, to make sure it's there. And are they going to get everything right exactly? No, but at least they're going to cause a discussion to have before it reaches a breaking point, right? So you got to make sure you have that. Eventually, I would love for security to just be like anything you would do. It becomes like a tool. It becomes like a normal thing. Remember when IT was like a special thing? Oh, we got to talk to the IT people. Well, technology is everywhere now. It's become ubiquitous, right? So we got to make security ubiquitous as well. That it's just a normal thing. It's just attached to it. It comes with your PC. Why do I have to buy antivirus on my PC? Remember those days where you have to like optionally buy that?
Oh yeah.
It comes with it, right? Like I don't buy seatbelts separately, right? I don't buy the airbag separately. It's there. It's on. So security just comes with everything that's built into that. And I think we need to reach that point where it becomes more ubiquitous.
Yeah, I talk with a lot of CISOs, and one of the worst situations, that they find themselves in is being the last person to know. Right, the IT manager comes up and says, "Oh, by the way, we're releasing this new software product, infrastructure, whatever. We're turning it on tomorrow. Can you go secure that?" What? What? So being ingrained in that entire architecture and development environment and having those champions, right? It's just so important because you can't clone yourself. At least we don't have the technology yet to be able to do that. With let's change it up a little bit here. And, you're working with your partners and with executives, C-suite and whatnot. And, they're seeing the news. They're seeing the data breaches and the hacks and the supply chain attacks and everything else. One of the big challenges, I think, with CISOs over the years has been the perception that security is binary. Either we have it and we're impervious to attack, or we don't, and we're going to fail in some way. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of CISOs out there, they pin their career, with their bosses and the board to say, okay, we won't be breached. We won't be hacked. That's my job. And they paint themselves into an unfortunate corner because, well, eventually it is going to happen, right? We don't have control over everything. How have you found in your career and with other successful people in the CISO role, how do we get past that? How do we have a discussion about that scale of risk, right? And that there's different points on that scale that are optimal for different organizations.
Yeah, so certainly I noticed the difference between banks and kind of other, companies, maybe just even, pure technology software companies. When they talk about risk, it's a very different discussion. Banks talk about, these aggregate risks that go through. It's like, oh, what does that mean? Like risk on top of risk, and how do you is it multiply? Is it exponential? Like how does that work, right? And so, but banks have been used to talking about risk. They even have a position called chief risk officer, right?
Right.
Most companies are like, well, that's kind of the CISO and that's kind of the legal counsel, and there's a bunch of people like everybody. No, there's a person designated to talk about risk, and certainly the risk officer. I mean, obviously in the past they worried about credit and money.
Right.
The bank, right? So that's the
The
origin.
financial instruments of risk.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly, there's lots of risks when it comes to that. But at the same time, they've been, adopting or utilizing a lot of those principles and thinking when it comes down to IT risk and security risk and privacy risks and whatnot. So as they go through that, it's a very interesting set of discussions that go on, right? Because they're so used to having these types of discussions. Whereas, other companies who may have no background in that, it's very binary. It's kind of like, should we do it or should we not? So it's kind of like, well, I don't think it's that like, no, okay. You have to really understand what's the aggregate. And so then at the same time, banks provide these like risk scores and numbers. It's 47.2. I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? Can I do it or not? Right? So, it's the Facebook world of thumbs up or thumbs. Come on,
Right.
it's simple. But it begins to tell the story that risk is it's a constant, it's a continuum, right? It's not like, okay, if you do it, it goes away. If you don't do it, you're dead. It's this thing. It keeps evolving, right? So let's say you do something. Well, nothing happened. You guys were wrong, right? There's zero risk here. Like, no, just keep going. Just keep going. Right? A matter of scale and all those things there.
Yeah.
So that risk-based thinking model, I think, is not. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody, become like banks and go do that. There's different reasons why, but I think there's some of that thinking that needs to come in to your point. We got to start having those discussions on aggregating of risks. Right? What if there's a series of things together versus just one piece? And so this is where we got to get people who can think like architects, may not be just an architect. An architect is a pretty, generic term, right? So there's a lot, so you can have a network architect, you can have an application architect, you have different groups there. You got to make sure you have a strong group of people who can come together on a regular basis and start really understanding the impacts. And you could apply this to availability. Certainly, if you're any kind of an e-commerce company, availability has to be king, right? Because obviously, if your
Right.
website goes down, going through. So as they think about those issues, I think it's very similar in terms of, well, what are the risks with availability? Oh yeah, all kinds of things. And so security definitely inserts itself when it comes to DDoS, right? Because they go, DDoS, that's a security problem. No, it's an availability problem, right? It's a
Right.
disruption to your business, right? Because again, they're not trying to steal anything; they're trying to disrupt your business. That's a business issue. Same thing with ransomware. Hey, ransomware is going to disrupt your business, and what is your backup process? What is your ability to recover? So those types of, I think, discussions lend itself, but only in the realm of a kind of an architecture or design, because you have to be able to look across. And then do you truly understand what the risks are and the ripple effects of one mistake, could be a small one, cascading all the way through. So I think security people are in a good position because I think we tend to see that. We have to.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't just say, oh, I'm going to stop ransomware. No, you got to understand the whole ecosystem. You got to worry about your backup systems. You got to worry about your recovery piece. All those things, even though they're not in my so-called domain, I'm going to make sure we understand the whole things all together. So I think we're uniquely in a position to always think wide, always think kind of enterprise, always think in terms of worst case, all those things. And we got to get, I think, other people who are in that kind of architecture role so that when you have issues, you really start looking at it together. I'll go. Now, not easy to do because nobody says they have time to get through that. So you got to
Right. Or
start.
want to spend the budget or have the friction of support or,
Because it
performance
sounds like
degradation.
bureaucracy. Yeah, David's talking about bureaucracy, and David wants to slow things down, and like, okay, all right. But it's one of those things like, you know what? We're at a scale, we're at a growth that, you know what? We need to do this, right? And so we're never going to get even bigger unless we do, right? So that, again, those are the things that really lends itself to having those types of discussions.
So, what about the constantly evolving threats? Because they are getting bigger and more powerful and more capable. We're seeing more 0 days. We're seeing billions of dollars flowing to cyber criminals. We're seeing nation states coming up. We're seeing a huge, leap forward in the capabilities of these threats, right? Whether it's their resources or their tools or how they choose to target, and their ability to maneuver. Right? How should CISOs, right, the next generation of CISOs, be thinking about that as it pertains to their priorities, their plans, their strategies?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I don't want to get to like bold predictions, but I think the future CISO, it doesn't have a network background, doesn't have whatever, even an application background, even what we know to be security. I think the CISO of the future, maybe like a data scientist, right? Maybe somebody who intrinsically understands how complex data, like petabytes of data, like I can't even imagine what that is. Like, when you think about these things, I just think of like, is that like Star Trek warp speed? Like, I don't know, how big is that? And like, can you consume it? Can you process it? Like, is that a log? I can't. So people who can really understand that, because the rate that things are going, the bad guys continue to take advantage and innovate, right? They're taking advantage of capabilities, and yeah, I am pretty sure that they'll be the first to figure out how to use quantum computing in a way not so good, right?
Right.
Versus things that are
We're on
good,
the
right?
cutting edge of
Oh, yeah.
technology.
I mean, we've already seen, how they're taking advantage of cryptocurrency. It's like, oh my gosh, I mean, I don't know what the percentage of how much of crypto is actually used by the bank. Like every ransomware payment, guess what? Crypto, right? So, gee, they're using it really well. So, you talk about innovation. Oh my gosh, the bad guys are the most innovative people in the world. They have no legacy. They don't worry about, user. I mean, they just go straight to. And so when you see that, it's almost like we have to be that way, which sounds crazy. But yeah, in terms of being able to keep up, I think there's a point in which there's only so much that I can do, me personally, to get to that. I think the next level has to evolve to people who can, again, comprehend things in a way, could really discern, understand. Certainly, you still have to have management, skills in terms of being able to prioritize risk management, whatnot. But in terms of the technical skills, I think it definitely requires something more than everything that we've accumulated so far. Because if you imagine, we have to go to the next level. I think it's going to be people like that. It's, whatever, maybe it's my kids, one of them, become this data scientist or whatever. They probably have a new name. It's, data astronaut. I don't know, something that's going to be cool to get through it that, will to be able to literally compete with, the innovation that the bad guys are doing and the innovation of where we're going in the future. Data is going to be just, obviously, it's already enormous, right? So, yeah, I think that's something to do with where the future CISO has to go.
Well, you had mentioned that, cascading failures, and I think the CISO of the future is going to have to be able to look strategically, extricate themselves out of those technical issues, right? Leave that to those technologists, but be able to pull back and see that forest, see those interactions, and so they can map out and predict. Okay, if this fails, here's the cascade, here's the flow, here's what. And the attackers are part of that equation. They're part of that landscape that the CISOs are going to have to be able to comprehend because the bad guys will find weak points. And it's not a direct path, right? We see attackers chaining things together, getting in and laying low, doing, reconnaissance, really finding opportune moments and technologies and even people, right? Social engineering and everything else. I think that CISO of the future has to be able to pull back, see the strategic picture, understand where the critical paths are to be able to put the proper controls and risk management in place. If not, they're just gonna be chasing.
Yeah, and the starting point now would be is, yeah, surround yourself with those types of smart people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
people much smarter than me, right? I mean, again, leader doesn't mean they're the smartest one. Doesn't mean they have the highest. Like, no, they means they're smart enough to hire and bring in
To
as well.
bring in those people. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I'm looking to hire a data scientist, on my team just to be able to comprehend and one, know what the other data scientists are
Right.
doing, like so I can really understand what the risks are, and I can really understand their techniques, their usage through that. And then I need somebody who could also really understand AI and ML, right? It's not just this thing in this box and magic it happens, right? Like how are we actually doing it? Not just how are we building, AI and ML capability, how are the bad guys using it against us, right? So when you see all these automated attacks that are going in, it's just kind of like, wow, the scale and the capability. It's just hard for me to imagine. Well, somebody who has an experience with that, they can probably do a better job imagining what that is and give me better input in terms of what we need to do. So, because I can't do it. So that's, I think, the first part. You gotta, recognize that. You gotta see that. So, but there's no such job called, yeah, security guru that knows data and also knows how to deal with bot attacks. Like, well, no, there's no such thing, right? And you have to literally kind of convince somebody who is an AI ML, expert and say, hey, you want to do this thing called security? It's really cool, and get to that because guess what? That's what the bad guys are doing, right? They're learning AI ML. They have already applied it. That's why it's so great to see startups, right? And so, in your intro, I work with a lot of startups and, they're the innovation, right? Because again, big companies don't do R&D anymore, right? That's just not the thing that most companies are doing. So you have to rely on startups to be the one that comes up with some great idea. And then they just are attacking that one problem, right? The one issue that they're really pushing on through that, and then they're going to get to market or whatever it is they want to get done. And so that kind of thinking is there in terms of that kind of brashness. Again, we're going to get done. So that's where I think our future has like with what the startups can do. And when I see the ideas that are coming up with, I just try to understand it. Like, what is this? What are you guys doing? If I could try to get that, but as they explain it and when they get to that, wow, you guys are definitely thinking ahead of the curve and trying to get to the next piece there. And those are the things that we need more of that. Certainly, there's plenty of startup companies that are out there, but we need more of that to come through. And then we need to start adopting. So I think us old CISOs like us, we need to give that a chance. We need to be able to adopt those ideas into it versus now let's just go with the big companies that we know. Yeah, even the ones that are basically obsolete and going out of business. Why are we investing in them, right? And we know who they are, right? I'm not going to name names, but we already know which ones have become dinosaurs and whatnot. And then we got to give the startups a chance because, again, they have the most innovative ideas. They're the ones going through it. Yes, there's a risk. Not every one of those things are going to stick and become, the de facto standard. But you know what? At this point, the standards aren't going to last long. Things are going to change so quickly. When we think about the basic firewall that was built probably like 30 years ago, most of it is still kind of in place. And, Palo Alto changed a lot of things. But at the same time, it's still the basic. It's the time frame is going to be much shorter. It's going to be like maybe every couple of years. Technology is going to shift and change and how we go through it. So that's the thing that I certainly have a bright future for. That I think it's going to come through there, and I think the startups are the ones who have that energy and who's going to bring forth and then help us old guys as we begin to retire.
So it sounds like you are a strong advocate of machine learning and deep learning as an automation capability to keep up with the bad guys, especially as they're using it as well. So CISO of the future, this is something that they're going to have to embrace.
Yeah, I mean, it's an arsenal, right? It's a set of things you got to have, right? Like in security, things never kind of throw away or completely gets replaced. You're always adding onto things, right? So I still got to get somebody who understands firewall rules and managing those spaces, right? VPN, like, oh my God, all this like dinosaur technology. We still have to have that. It doesn't go away, right? But then we also have to be able to adopt new things. Fortunately, a lot of security vendors are kind of giving you those capabilities in a box so that you can take advantage of it. So you don't have to have AI specialists. But again, that's fine. So it's getting better and better as the more that you could use. And so I think that's the whole idea, which is I don't have to be an expert in it. I just need to be able to consume it. I need the use cases to be able to take care of what I need to get done. So the more that, again, companies are starting to provide that, all those, fun vendors out there who are always trying to call me, if they have those good ideas, those are the things that we need to be able to incorporate it. So yeah, I need it because I have to, Matt. It's not like, hey, I think I'm so smart. It's like, that's the only way. I'm not going to scale. I can't keep doubling my staff because it's impossible, right?
It's not sustainable. You just can't do that.
Right, exactly.
So, you've got experience both in heavily regulated environments and less regulated environments or non-regulated environments. How does that embrace an adoption of that type of innovation?
Yeah.
AI being just one, there's lots of innovation out there. How does it differ between the regulated environments versus non-regulated?
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons, right? There's always two sides to the coin of anything. So you would think a heavily regulated environment, all the security, endless budget. You heard Jamie Dimon and all these big banks saying, oh yeah, they're, endless budget and they spend like billions of dollars. Like,
Right.
oh my God, try it. But that doesn't solve it, right? Just throwing money at it and throwing big things isn't going to do it. So, the thing in the regulated environment is they're much more kind of like, kind of reaching certain kind of standards. At the same time, sometimes you get focused on the process and not the outcome, right? So you go through so many things to follow the guidelines, to follow the steps, to follow NIST exactly. Nobody's making a judgment, right? And you have to add that human factor to it. You have to be able to discern that at some point you have so many people, you have 27 cooks in the kitchen. How is that dish going to turn out when you have 27 cooks in the kitchen? Yeah, it may not be that great if you kind of think about it that way. So I think leadership is a part that sometimes may be missing. And what I mean by leadership, it's not just the CISO, leadership among the whole team. Everybody's a leader, right? But sometimes when you're heavily regulated, it's like, okay, well, you just got to do it. It just says you got to do it, right? Like, why are we doing that? I don't know why, but you just got to do it, right? So when you get answers or responses like that, that's when you know you're in trouble because nobody really understands why they're doing things and things kind of go off the cue. Or you're focusing on the wrong things. You're focusing on the lowest risk item when you're not. You should be focusing on the higher risk. So that's one side of the coin in terms of the pros and cons. Certainly, companies they're just like, just do it. Right? They're the Nikes of just do it. Like, okay, look, can we maybe a couple of processes we want to put in place? Let's just do a simple risk assessment. So there are things to be learned, as you get to that because It's this, well, we'll learn and adjust. We'll break it and then well, yeah, but sometimes security, when you break it, the impact is catastrophic. It's so big that, you don't want to have that. So you try to balance the two. So, as I've been on both sides of things, and I see it that way. Some days I wish I was more on this side. It was be so much easier. Other days, I wish I was on this side. So it's you got to kind of find that right blend, and you got to find the adoption. There are companies, that I've been recruited for who wanted me because I came from a banking background. So, Dave, you must know every security issue, and you must know how to fix every single thing because banks spend millions of dollars on it. So when I come over there, like, well, but we don't actually want that, right?
Be careful what you ask for.
Bank. Well, what do you think it meant, right? It meant, okay, well, these are the things we're going to put in. We're going to, follow NIST, and we're going to apply all of our controls against that, and we're going to lock up your laptop, and we're going to, oh, that's not really what we wanted, right? And so I think there is that both ends to it, and we got to obviously find the happy medium where we're enabling the business at the same time securing it. So I don't have a great answer for you except that, I've been on both sides, and I see that. And what you got to do is kind of take the experiences of both, right? So when you're at a bank, you got to say, guys, we got to innovate, right? The fintechs are killing us, right? So you know what? There's clearly opportunities out there in the market, which is why the fintech, industry has grown so much. Clearly, they're taking advantage of it. Banks have been stuck on the legacy. They're still running mainframes. There's still a bunch of things there, so it's really hard for them to change and shift. And again, fintechs have taken advantage of that. And so, you know what? You gotta worry about it. And the same thing with the startups or the smaller companies. Like, you guys are not going to last long if you don't have a process, you don't have maturity built into it. So, try to find that medium there.
So there's a dirty little secret that many CISOs talk about that, just because you're compliant to a specific regulation, it doesn't mean you're actually secure. Do you buy into that? Do you think that you have to go beyond just meeting the minimum requirements of satiating regulations, or do you think that's the right place to start and kind of anchor yourself?
The key thing to understand is, when you do any of these kind of industry standard audits, attestations, or compliance type of things, it's usually at a point in time, right? And so it's not so much that it's bad, it's more that it's a point in time. So if I'm going to do my SOC 2 attestation, I need to do it every single day. I need to do it every single hour, right? Every single minute. So how do you get to this continuous validation as a means to kind of manage your controls in your environment? So what I do is, the politically correct answer, I do both, right? Right. So, we bring in auditors, we do audits, we follow the different compliance frameworks, we get all those things done. So I have a team who focuses on it that gets that. Now, do I blindly say that that's it? I don't have to worry about it? No, I can't, right? So that's why I still have like red teams to do. I have external tests, I have other things that I'm doing. I build a continuous validation team who are actually checking to make sure that the controls are working every single day. And that's through automation and different things. And there are various types of tools and companies out there who actually help you do that. Because I can't solely rely on an audit that was done 6 months ago and it's good for another 6. Like, okay, you know what? That doesn't mean just because you have a SOC 2, that doesn't mean the bad guys will leave you alone, right?
They don't get the message.
So you have that, but it's not going to be the part that's going to save you. So you have to also complement that with a continuous validation.
So our industry right now, there simply aren't enough CISOs out there to cover all the different spaces. And, there's a lot of opportunities and we're seeing people that don't have the CISO background, right? Everybody's got to have their first job, but they're getting offered, okay, will you be the CISO? Will you be that person? You mentioned earlier, there's a risk of, well, you're the scapegoat, right? If something goes bad, you're the one that they're going to fire. And there's often a lot of apprehension in somebody taking that, what they perceive as a leap across a massive chasm and become that CISO. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's being considered or is thinking about moving into that CISO role? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I get to is don't get concerned about not having, again, all the traditional background and things. And, I don't need to be Cisco certified, Microsoft certified, SAN certified. Like, all the things that a lot of security people love to, have their certifications that they do. Understanding the technical issues, always great. I'm not saying it's not useful, but it's like, that's not what's going to help you, be successful on that. So always make sure you understand, again, risk is always prevalent, right? So you always have to make sure that you're comfortable in being able to discern, come up with a process of how you think through risk and go through that. So I think that's the part, because there is a bit of intimidation going to like, oh, you don't understand how to configure a firewall? Like, no, like, oh, you're not worthy to be a CISO. Like, since when's the last time any CISO has actually
Right.
like, okay, that's
I haven't set ACLs in 20 years.
Yeah. So those are the type of things to kind of get away, because he doesn't have the chops, or she, or doesn't have the background. And I think women and minorities also into that picture as well, of just like, well, traditionally that's not what's there. So what we want to make sure is, let's clear the slate there. Okay, those types of things is not, I mean, I'm not saying it's not important, it's just that it's not the key thing that's going to drive you to it. So any background could lend itself to that. My own story, I was an accidental CISO, right? It's kind of like, I didn't study this, I didn't have that as a background. How did I work my way through it? I utilize everything that I learned my entire career as you go, and that is always helpful. I dealt with problems, I dealt with risk, I try to prioritize, all the things that you got to do, communicate, expound. So those are the things that's, I think, more important. So I think what we have to do as a collective community is to help to say, guys, can we cut out this litmus test, and to be part of the fraternity you have to do. That's not important, guys. We need to really open it up. We need fresh thinking. We need new thinking. We need people who come in looking at it differently, so that to help all of us, so that we can learn from each other. Because if you get a bunch of CISOs together, we're all talking war stories, but it's the same ones, right? Get through. So we got to be getting different way. How do you solve a problem in a different way? How do you go through? Are there different things that we can learn from it? So I think we have an obligation to open that up, because we talked about it. We can't scale the way we are. The bad guys aren't like, okay, yes, you must also have a background in this in order to be a bad guy. No. That's not it. They just take advantage of whatever is available, whatever they can do. So I think we have to be open to that as well. And then, women, minorities, we need to have more people with different colors, different backgrounds, just like anything. Let's take advantage of it, right? Let's not fall down kind of a path, and then we become, and maybe we already are, dinosaurs, right? Which is, you don't want to be.
Yeah, that inclusion, that diversity, right? And we talk about women, we talk about underrepresented minorities. There's huge opportunities, I believe, in that space at all levels in cybersecurity, including the CISO. And I think we're seeing more and more of that come in, because, again, that diversity of thought and experience and training and background really does give an advantage. So I'm completely with you, with that, and it's hugely important. And we are coming to the end of our time here. I do have one question. So we've got a lot of CISOs and soon-to-be CISOs and security professionals that watch and listen. If you had one piece of advice of people in the trenches, and maybe they're on fire trying to put out the fires, right? Everybody struggles to a certain extent in this role. What one piece of advice would you want to convey to them? You would want them to take pause and think about as part of their career and their livelihood and their sanity. What do you want them to walk away with?
Yeah, I think it's similar to just about any kind of job, which is, don't let the stress, kind of consume you. And I think especially the CISO job, because every day, every minute can be stressful. There's problems all over the place. Even as we were talking, I'm getting text on something that's going on, like, okay, all right. So, my younger self would have been like, oh, I gotta go, I gotta fire and go to that. As you're kind of going through it, you manage your way through. I think that's the part. And then that also bleeds into the last question you talked about, right? Which is, are there prerequisites? Do you have to be a certain thing? Are you getting questioned on your So it's really finding that right balance, because really the CISO is the balance. Remember when we were kids, you're on the seesaw, right? And you're kind of in the middle there, and you're trying to balance yourself to try to make sure you don't fall off. Yeah, that's kind of what we're constantly doing. We're seesawing back and forth and making sure. And so the idea is to be comfortable in that it's going to be 1, 2, 3 series of issues, and hopefully you don't get to a breach, but there's always some kind of a breach that you're dealing with as you work your way through it. So you gotta get to the point that you feel that you can thrive in it, not because it's crazy, meaning don't be up, 24 hours a day on caffeine. Think of it more in terms of get your sleep, take care of your family, do a thing, but you gotta set things in motion. You gotta have things in place. You gotta have a good team. You gotta be able to have clear responsibilities. All the things have to be kind of set up as you work your way through, and you gotta certainly build trust with your management team, leadership team, who know that they can depend on you, and I can depend on them if I need help. So those are all things that I think you want to be in a good environment that's going to lead you to do it. It's possible, and certainly I'm sure there are positions where maybe the company doesn't have those things in place. Maybe every single day everything's on fire with that. At some point, yeah, that may not sustain itself, right? Not just for yourself, but for the company as well. So choose wisely, be in places that you're going to be comfortable with. And then, yeah, that whole, cliche, be yourself. I've learned along the way that, yeah, I'm never going to be that expert, blah, 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 that they thought that a CISO was supposed to be. But you know what? I've done myself pretty well in terms of, adding to things and ultimately being able to make decisions that work for your company, and then these are things that I'm comfortable with. And that's kind of along the way that I realized that, yeah, maybe there's something here for me, because it's not like I read this in a book. It's not like somebody gave me the answer to see. It's just that I was able to think my way through, and I felt comfortable, and it kind of worked out. And maybe there's something to this. And so that's when I started to realize that bringing your authentic self is so important, because you're really bringing everything that you've learned along the way. And my authentic self is also, I reach out for help. I ask friends like, Matthew, what's going on with this? What are you going on? What do you know about this? What's happened there? Going to that, that's all about it. So you got to build that community of people that you can trust and who can work with you. Those are all things. So to say that I'm not the expert is just as important as knowing, hey, I know exactly what we need to get done. Let's do X, Y, Z. So that's the only thing I can tell you going to that. But I definitely encourage anybody to don't be afraid to get into this industry just because of the stress, or just because what you hear about breaches and hacks and all that. You know what? Those are all things that can be managed, and then bring yourself to it. And along the way, enjoy the ride.
David, thank you for your just incredible insights. We really appreciate that. And to the audience, thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe to catch all the Cybersecurity Vault episodes, where we chat with industry leaders like David here and dive into the most relevant and interesting cybersecurity challenges, perspectives, and best practices. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Matthew. Take care.